Wisconsin, good morning. You're on with Christopher
Morning,
Hitchens.
Brian. How's things going there?
Doing pretty good, sir.
Pretty
How are
good.
you this morning?
Well, fine. We don't get a morning paper around here. Matter of fact, I quit the paper altogether.
How come?
Excuse me.
Well, I just can't digest Gannett's news,
So
the Gannett paper up here.
I see. What's on your mind this morning?
Now, I'd just like to ask this gentleman how he would like, and I would like to see the Russians take over this country and see how they would report under the Russians' form of government. They seem to tear this government all to hell and shred it all to pieces on the minute, littlest things. I can't buy that. It's constantly and constantly. I was a World War II veteran. And I wouldn't want one of them guys sitting alongside of me in the foxhole or up in the plane.
Okay, let's see what...
I think they're two-faced all the way through.
All right, let's see what Mr. Hitchens has to say.
Well, I missed the Second World War, so I can't really comment on that, but I think most of the people I've talked to who were in it have no complaints about the way it was reported and didn't mind sharing foxholes with a lot of very brave journalists and photographers, many of whom gave their lives to report the news. And if you think that the photograph of the Marine Corps raising the flag on Iwo Jima is a good enough photograph for the Arlington Monument to the Marine Corps, then I think it's probably good enough for me. That's on that. As to the Russians taking over the country, well, their attitude to the press is the same as yours seems to be, which is that the less of it, the better. I don't know if that irony has occurred to you. You don't seem to be on other things very pro-Russian.
What do you Pennsylvania, good morning.
Good morning, how are you today?
Good, sir. How are you?
Fine.
What do you read?
I read just my local papers, only from the standpoint that I don't subscribe to any of the larger newspapers.
What is your local paper?
My local paper is the Daily Intelligencer, and basically it carries local news as well as some selected national interest items.
Where's your city located? What's it close to?
It's about 30 miles north of Philadelphia.
Okay, thank you very much. Go ahead with your comment.
I'd just like to comment on the press issue. Many journalists that I see today seem to forget that even though free press is a right, there may be some priorities within the rights of our own Constitution, and that being self-preservation of our national interests. When you take a look at past world history and the like, even as recent as the Falklands, the Britons restricted their press so severely that they kept them on ships and the like. When journalists lose their credibility, and I think in this country journalists have lost their credibility based upon their past performances, the American people are speaking out now. And I just feel that without no type of checks and balances on the journalists, they're doing exactly what this gentleman's doing here. They bring a foreign news agent over into the country, okay, report on all the faults, okay, but don't take a deep enough look at the positive aspects of what a free press really is.
I'm getting fed up with this kind of questioning, actually. I mean, 30 miles from north of Philadelphia as you are, how do you presume to know that the American people are speaking out? To the extent that you do know, or to the extent that you can speak for them, you can only know it through reading a free press and watching a free TV. The truth is that the papers are reporting the fact that they're unpopular with the administration, and the column with which David began, Luke Cannon's column today, says he admits it's true that public opinion is probably on Reagan's side on this one. But if you want your press to be treated as the British treated their press in the Falklands, you're going to end up not knowing very much about what's going on. If that's what you want, don't read the papers, but do not prevent me or anyone else from reading them.
Okay, well, the whole aspect or the whole problem is how do I know? It's by watching programs like C-SPAN where there is reaction and there is comments and there is interaction between the people. It's certainly not by reading tabloids and magazines such as yours, which has been so severely edited or slanted.
How do you know that if you don't read it?
I would never read it because it's, only from the simple point that I know how an editor works.
Well, you're obviously very lucky. You don't need to be told anything. You don't need to read anything. You just know. Now, not everyone is as smart as you. Give them a chance.
Yeah, well, we'll give them the chance, okay, if you do the likewise.
Okay, let's go on to Campbell,
I think
California.
that the economic problems facing the UK and the US are caused primarily by the competitive prowess of Japan and the Pacific Basin. Do you favor London putting pressure on Washington and allowing those Asian countries to begin footing the bill and taking financial responsibility for their own national defenses?
Thank you.
I think that when we take the full measure of the disaster that has been the Reagan presidency, we'll be spoiled for choice as to decide which was the stupidest long-run thing that he did. But among them, high on the list will have to be inaugurating a trade war with Japan while trying to urge them to remilitarize. One or the other, sir, but not both. It's going to have the most profoundly horrible consequences. It would be utterly wrong for Europe to have any part of such an insane policy.
Probably 80 or maybe 90% of the papers in here run a single feature called The Real Astrology. I'd love to hear your feelings on that.
Golly. Well, I think it's probably, it's not the most sinister form of current superstition, and we are going to be facing a tsunami of nonsense of this kind as the millennium gets nearer, I think, of Nostradamus recyclings and all kinds of burblings from the beyond and all kinds of that thing. But astrology is, I think, the most feeble-minded of the superstitions, and sinister only in the sense that it's the most solipsistic, just as the religious fool believes that he is the object of God's creation and was is so loved and created for purpose and even supervised all the time. That's how much he counts. And by the way, this is what's known as modesty among Christians. I don't understand it, but I can see why they call themselves a flock, all right. The fact is that it's been discovered a long time ago that not only is the universe not man-centered, it isn't even earth-centered, it isn't even sun-centered. It probably doesn't go around anything very much. No. Obviously, the solipsists and the narcissists and the falsely modest are depressed to find this, so much better to think that a star map that was drawn before Neptune, Pluto, and Uranus were discovered has the remaining planets orbiting to find out what your chances are of getting laid. I would not, I certainly, if I was, I would never refuse an advertisement of any kind. And I.F. Stone in his weekly was always very firm about that. He never took ads, didn't want them, but he would always criticize even his favorite local papers if they did refuse objectionable advertisements. I think it's a matter of principle. I don't agree with the Buckley Supreme Court decision on political money as given being First Amendment exercise. I think that's obscene. But I think advertising is free speech. So, but I wouldn't run an astrology column. I just wouldn't. And I remember when Fleet Street Paper, where I worked once, for my sins, I've done a lot of work at the yellow end of the trade in my time, and I dare say that it shows. It was decided to fire the astrologist, and I always wished I was the editor who wrote the sacking letter, which began, "As you will no doubt have foreseen." Fleet Street was a very heartless place in those days. That's how I'd get rid of mine if I ever inherited an alternative
This
paper.
last election.
I did. I turned up early.
You want to tell us who you voted for?
I voted for the senator from Illinois.
Why?
Well, I'm not any longer a registered member of any party and don't have any ideological allegiance any longer, and in a way, McCain's position on the war was more close to my own. But I thought Obama would learn more about the war than McCain had. McCain's position was actually rather an eccentric one about Afghanistan and about Iraq. I thought Obama showed signs of having the right stuff on this. I have to say, as an admirer of Senator McCain's, I thought he was too, how do I put this without being impolite? I mean, too exhausted to be running for anything, frankly. And that his choice of running mate was quite simply ridiculous. No, much worse than ridiculous. Insulting. Not serious. I didn't think a serious vote could be cast for the Republican ticket on this occasion. So that made that bit easy. And then I suppose I've thought for a long time the United States has been ready for ages to prove that it will vote for a qualified black candidate. Let's get this done. I didn't think there was anything very surprising about it. I mean, all through the year people were saying things like, oh, the Bradley effect will kick in. Even if the Bradley effect doesn't, the polling machines will be fixed. If the polling machines aren't fixed, then someone will take a rifle and take the brother down. And so, no. Very interesting and impressive to see how easily it got done and how natural it seemed when it was. And though I didn't get as emotional and moist about that as some people did, it was an ingredient in making it a pleasure to vote for him. That plus, I like him as a writer, I should say. I like the way he talks, I like the way he writes. I'm impressed by his just command of English, which is the thing that matters to me the most.
Did you read his 2 books?
I did, yeah.
What did you think of them?
Well, I thought the first one was much better because it was written when he didn't know he was going to be a politician. And the second one is written under the awful knowledge that he's now in play. But even given that, you can tell he's written it himself. He's taking the risks of making various commitments he'll have to live up to. And he's got a sense of humor, sense of irony, and a really, very, really admirable grasp of the language that means the most to me.
The day we're recording this, your name
Jersey,
came up.
you're on the air. Good morning.
Good morning. Happy 4th of July.
Thank you.
The reason I'm calling this morning is I've always voted since I was 20 years old as a Republican. I served in Vietnam. I'm a disabled combat wounded veteran from Vietnam. But I am now in a phase of my life where my children are getting ready to go to college. My mom, who is widowed, is on the Medicare. She's a widow of a civil service retired employee. And I seen an article that was covered by C-SPAN where they had a voters representation group that was totally non-Republican or Democratic. And they showed what the proposed budgets and the tax cuts were going to be. And they also showed, it was in the evening, the disproportionate benefits that were going to the more wealthy on the Republican programs versus the benefits that were not going to be given to the lower income folks on the Democratic side of the program.
So what's this all mean to you?
It means to me, as a person who is supporting a household with 2 children in college on $53,000 a year with a mortgage and living in New Jersey with a high tax rate, that the Republican Party has lost faith in us, the mid-American, the worker. They've lost faith in the elderly, in their promises to take care of them. And they come back with their figures and their rhetoric. But what I've been seeing is when you actually put the facts and figures on the line, the money of each program, the Democratic and the Republican, in their taxes is very similar, except it is disproportionately going to the wealthy on the Republican side, and on the Democratic side, it's going to the people that really need it.
All right, thanks for your call. Mr. Davis.
Well, first of all, under the Republican plan, your taxes would have been reduced to $1,000 if you've got 2 kids living at home. $500 per child exemption would have put that back in your pocket immediately. There are some other cuts in that program as well, but that would have been immediate, and I don't think you're wealthy. $53,000 a year with a couple of kids at home. On the loans and the Medicare, the benefits would not have been cut. They would have been increased, but by allowing choice and the market forces to work on that, we felt we could have held down the increase in those costs. And besides, Medicare Part A is going bankrupt anyway. The trustees just came back and showed that we're losing $25 million a day that we're paying out on Medicare, not taking in. And that's got to be fixed. And if nothing else, give the party courage for trying to tackle that issue and bring that to the forefront. We haven't brought that to a closure yet. But if you're a working American, it seems to me, that Republican proposal will give you some of the tax relief you want, and your benefits aren't to cut. Your student loans are still available to your kids, the educational opportunities and the like. So I would take issue. I didn't see that particular panel. But you are the typical American. I think this program was made to benefit. Now, if you're sitting on welfare and not working with 2 or 3 kids, maybe you don't come out as well under the Republican plan, and I would be the first to concede that.
With respect, Congressman, I think that tap dances slightly, if not past the letter, certainly past the spirit of the caller's question. What you could hear in his voice was the feeling that the country is becoming more unequal and unfair. And in fact, if you look at the reports from the Bureau of Statistics, the GAO, the Census Department, come out recently,
shows that the distribution of income and wealth in this country has become very, very, very sharply more unequal in the last 10 years. Now, as someone who has no partisan interests and who hasn't failed to notice that Congress was Democratic for a lot of that time, and
we don't argue, we don't disagree with
thing.
those facts.
I think it's a bipartisan responsibility, so to say, but it remains a fact that the distribution of wealth and income in the United States is becoming much more like classical class-divided hierarchical societies like the one I originate from than it has ever been before, and that no number of figures or promises on the juggling of different pieces of legislation is going to unconvince people that that's happening.
But let me make 2 points. In the Republican plan, first of all, on the tax cuts, the $500 per income child credit, the income was, I mean, you're over $110,000 a year, you don't get the tax credit, period. On Medicare Part B, we means test. If you're making over $120,000 a year, $125,000 a year, you have to pay the full boat on Medicare. There is a means test on Part B. Part A, which is the part that's paid out of the trust fund, everybody would get. So that is hardly, helping the wealthy. That is trying to bring it back more toward the middle-income Americans where it's targeted at. But we have lost the rhetorical war, I think, with the Democrats at this point. And I think this caller illustrates the fact that you talk enough about the rich versus poor and the haves and the have-nots, you can be convincing. But I really believe that the facts are otherwise.
But how's he supposed to feel when he's sitting there disabled from having served his country, reading about corporate top-level remuneration? You can open any paper any day.
Government doesn't set corporate.
No, we're talking about the society, not the government, about what is happening in the United States.
Yeah, we've done more to cut corporate welfare over the last 2 years in Republican Congress than has been done in 2 decades.
But the top-level remuneration seems to be going up very, very
same for baseball players and entertainers.
In other words, the upward redistribution of income, the redistribution of income towards the rich seems to have gone on in spite of this. And then you look at the front page of the Washington Post last Sunday. Dan Morgan had an amazing story. $10 billion more have been given to the military-industrial complex by Congress than even Clinton asked for, and he asked for a lot, to the point where all across the South they're having to create special new boondoggle projects just to make sure the money gets spent. They literally have been given more than they know what to do with. There are scandals of this kind in every paper every day, and it's staring everybody in the face. The country is
spending more money on military is not a scandal. Military spending has dropped each of the last 10 years in this country. Defense spending has dropped, where next year we'll be spending more money on interest on the national debt than we will for all of national defense together. I think many of us, including some of the military leaders that have served under this president, are very, very cautious and think maybe defense spending is something we've cut a little bit too much. We've made this mistake after the Revolutionary War, and we ended up fighting the War of 1812. After World War I, we disarmed, and we had to rearm for World War II. We need to downsize military, but we've done that in a significant way. 55% of the federal, in 1955, 62% of the federal budget was defense. Today it's 17%.
I didn't say this money was actually being spent on the defense of the country. To the contrary, it's being spent on what I've heard called unsmilingly the contractor community.
Let me get a call.
Which is also the donor community.
But that's research and development, much of that.
Yes.
Fremont, Ohio, good morning.